press conference to present the preliminary statement of findings and conclusions from the international observers for yesterday's presidential and early parliamentary elections here in Serbia. Presenting the statement today will be Kyriakos Hadjiani, the Special Coordinator and Leader of the OSCE Short-Term Observers, Alexander Patier, the Head of the PACE Delegation of Observers, Thijs Reuten, the Head of the EU Delegation of Observers, Bryndis Haraldsdottir, Head of the OSCE PA Delegation, Parliamentary Assembly Delegation, and Douglas Wake, Head of the Election Observation Mission from the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. Today's press conference will be carried out both in English and in Serbian, so there are headsets if you need one on the side to grab that. We will also, after the statements by the participants here, have time for questions from the media. So, but before that, with no further ado, please, Mr. Hadjiani.
Ne dužimo previše.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you all for coming, and to the people of Serbia for the warm welcome to our many observers, as well as more than 300 international observers working together on election day. I extend my thanks to my colleagues here for your close cooperation and to the dedicated work of all of our observers working across the country yesterday. One thing to note before starting: our statements relate to the presidential and parliamentary elections, as the local elections were not our focus. Our main assessment is that yesterday presidential and early parliamentary elections presented diverse political options, but a number of shortcomings resulted in an uneven playing field favoring the incumbents. While fundamental freedoms were largely respected during the campaign, the combined impact of unbalanced access to media and due pressure on public sector employees to support the incumbents, significant campaign finance disparities, and misuse of administrative resources led to unequal conditions for contestants. Recent legislative changes adopted follow extensive discussions among the ruling parties, as some of the opposition included some welcome improvements, but key aspects of the electoral process require further reform and, of course, implementation. While media covered all electoral contestants, most public and private broadcasters with national coverage favored the incumbent president and the ruling coalition, limiting the opportunity of voters to make fully informed choices. Election day was smoothly conducted and peaceful overall, but despite solid preparations, was marked by a number of systematic procedural deficiencies related to polling stations layout, overcrowding, breaches in secrecy of the vote, and numerous instances of family voting. In a short while, you will receive our full statement. This report includes much more detail and extensive analysis to explain and support our conclusions. In considering these congruent elections, it is important to keep in mind that they took place against a backdrop of intense polarization between the ruling coalition and opposition parties, which had been reflected in an opposition boycott of the 2020 parliamentary elections. In the months leading up to the elections, extensive consultation took place, resulting in a political agreement between the government and some opposition parties to amend the electoral legal framework. We found that the legal framework overall provides an adequate basis for the conduct of democratic elections, but importantly, effective implementation and a number of additional measures are indispensable to fully ensure a level playing field. I very much hope that we will see action in this field in the coming months and, of course, years. Allow me to make a few additional comments related to what our observers saw in polling stations yesterday. As mentioned, Election Day was calm and peaceful overall, with only some incidents. Voting procedures were generally followed, but the process was marked by overcrowding and insufficient understanding of the procedures by polling board members. The secrecy of the vote was compromised in a significant number of polling stations due to inadequate layout or inappropriate positioning of voting screens and voters not voting their ballots. Instances of unauthorized persons keeping track of voters taking pictures of their ballot, and individuals assisting multiple voters were observed in some polling stations. The vote count was conducted efficiently, but its transparency was often undermined by rushed or concurrently conducted procedures and overcrowding. While the Republic Election Commission published turnout figures throughout the day, it failed to announce any figures following the closing of the polls. Nonetheless, President Vučić claimed victory on election night based on unofficial data. I will now invite my partners who are to share their reflections and would be happy to then address any questions you may have. But in conclusion, I will reiterate that this was a competitive campaign and, importantly, included opposition candidates this time, but the pervasive influence of the ruling parties gave them undue advantage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hadjiani. And now, please, Mr. Poche.
Thank you very much. I had the honor and the pleasure to lead here the delegation of Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe. And I'm Polish senator, and at the same time, I'm the chairman of the largest political family within Assembly, which is EPP. I fully subscribe to the words of Kyriakos about wonderful ambience and here in Serbia and your hospitality. It's really, I had a very, very warm talks with so many Serbians and so many people in the polling stations. We came to Belgrade with the delegation of 25 persons, including parliamentarians representing all political families at Parliamentary Assembly, and also the representatives of Venice Commission, which is a very, very important body in the structures of our Assembly. And then I would like to thank all my colleagues sitting here for the full and very fruitful cooperation about this statement that I fully share. The Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe has observed all elections in Serbia since 2000, with the exception of the parliamentary election in 2020. The reason that we are observing election in Serbia is that, unfortunately, Serbia is under monitoring by our body. I would like to underline that since 2000, all but one, parliamentary elections in Serbia have been early elections. In this regard, I think that while legally this is absolutely possible, this, let's say, culture of early elections impacts the efficient and autonomous functioning of the parliament according to the constitutional terms of office, no matter which political forces are in power. And I'm taking once again words of my friend Kyriakos, that it is regrettable that the public broadcaster and the majority of media outlets were not balanced during the electoral campaign. We can say whatever we want about the day of elections, but I strongly believe that the neutral coverage of what is happening in the country by the media is probably the most important for democracy and the rule of law. I will conclude by saying that our Assembly and the Venice Commission look forward to continuing the cooperation with Serbian relevant authorities to further improve the electoral legislation and the general electoral practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Poce. And now please, Mr. Reuten.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Thijs Reuten and I'm honored to address you on behalf of the European Parliament Election Observation Delegation. We observe these elections together with members of national parliaments as part of the OSCE ODIHR International Election Observation Mission. And our delegation from the European Parliament comprised 7 members from 6 different political groups. Our delegation subscribes fully to the statement of the preliminary findings and conclusions of the International Election Observation Mission. And I would like to express our thanks to Douglas Wake, the head of the ODIHR IUM, and his team for their outstanding support and cooperation, and also to the other heads of parliamentary delegations and their colleagues. And a special word of thanks to the Ambassador Emmanuel Joffre, head of the EU delegation here in Serbia. Yesterday, Serbian citizens went to the polls and exercised their right to choose their representatives. With their vote, they have shown their attachment to pluralism and to democracy in a difficult time by coming out to vote in higher numbers than the last time. This last year, however, has been challenging for Serbia. Political tensions have been having undesired, divisive effect on society. The unprovoked aggression by the Russian Federation against Ukraine has also posed a huge challenge to all European countries, including Serbia, and makes us, and also this cruel war, makes us realize even more how important it is to work together to preserve security, freedom and democracy within our European family. On Sunday, our delegation observed the vote and the count in the wider Belgrade area, in Novi Sad and in Jagodina. We met many attentive and dedicated members of the polling boards and also many warmly welcoming citizens. Key procedures for voting, counting and tabulation were followed. However, in some of the polling stations that we have visited, the voting booths in particular did not always ensure the secrecy of the vote. We also observed missing seals on 2 ballot boxes. And regrettably, we also received reports about some incidents, including the use of violence against opposition candidate Pavle Grbovic. And in addition, we heard about several issues brought to our attention regarding voters from minority communities, including ethnic Albanians from the Presevo Valley who were denied their vote, and citizens from the Romanian minority who allegedly experienced difficulties with the voting procedure. Unlike former elections, Serbs from Kosovo were unable to cast their votes close to their homes with OSCE assistance, as has been the case previously. and we regret Pristina's lack of cooperation on this matter. However, we positively note efforts from Kosovo enabling the smooth transfer to polling stations for some eligible voters. We welcome, as European Parliament, the extensive participation of parties and candidates from both majority and opposition in these elections, resulting in a more diverse and pluralistic assembly. The European Parliament, through all its activities, and in particular via the inter-party dialogue, has always endeavoured to support political pluralism and reinforcement of an inclusive election environment. Now, in this new political environment, genuine efforts are needed to address jointly and in a spirit of collaboration some long-standing flaws in the electoral process. The dominant role of the governing majority has been, and still is, a matter of serious concern. The abuse of administrative resources gave the ruling coalition a significant advantage. And this is also reflected, for example, in the largely uncritical overexposure in the media of the incumbent president and others supporting the ruling coalition. The majority of nationwide media outlets, private and public, often served as tools of disinformation. Media freedom and pluralism, journalists' safety, and ample access to different opinions and sources of information are essential for a well-functioning democracy. Media representatives and civil society organizations have also reported systemic vilification of critical voices during the campaign. The International Electoral Observation Monitoring Mission received many credible reports regarding pressure on voters to support the ruling coalition. Of particular concern are allegations of intimidation and pressures on citizens working in the public sector. Alleged widespread vote-buying attempts are also serious flaws that need to be properly investigated and addressed. We regret that the Unified Voter Register is still inaccurate and contains a significant number of deceased persons. Moreover, there were reports ahead of the elections of mass registration in Belgrade of voters from abroad, especially to enlarge the electorate here in this city. Many of the concerns were already expressed in the previous OSCE ODIHR reports. We now call on the newly elected authorities, the newly elected parliamentarians, to deliver on these crucial issues. The European Parliament and the European Union at large will closely follow the post-electoral developments in Serbia, and we will be ready to support the political parties in implementing reforms that strengthen democracy in your beautiful country. The Serbian citizens have made their choice. Now it is up to their representatives to act in the interest of the people. And in conclusion, I would like once again to congratulate you, the people of Serbia, for your turnout yesterday in higher numbers. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you, Mr. Reitend. Now please, Ms. Hellersdotter.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Bryndís Haraldsdóttir and I'm a member of the Icelandic Parliament. It was an honor to serve as a head of the OSCE PA delegation for the election observation to yesterday's presidential and early parliamentary election here in Serbia. It is a pleasure for me to be here in Belgrade after very interesting days spent in the country, having experienced and appreciated its vibrant, inspiring society and outstanding hospitality. In our OSCE delegation, we had almost 60 members of parliaments from 26 OSCE participating states. We have deployed in Belgrade city and surroundings in Niš, Nova Sadia, Usupocija, and a number of smaller towns around the country. In the previous day, we had comprehensive briefings with authorities, political parties, civil society, and media representatives. As parliamentarians, we have combined our political experience with a thorough knowledge of OSCE, ODIHR, election experts, and short and long-term observers in what was truly a joint effort. On the election day, I have seen an overall smooth conduct of proceedings in polling station. However, as you know, our observation mission does not only focus on election day procedures, but on the whole electoral process. In this regard, as you will also read in more details, we remain concerned for a number of long-standing shortcomings, including those regarding the use of state resources in the election campaign, the unequal access to media, and the management of voters' lists. Some of these shortcomings touch upon critical parts of the electoral process. On the other hand, I welcome the improvements to some parts of the electoral legal framework that were undertaken after the agreement between the government and some opposition parties in recent months. Dialogue and compromises are of the essence of the democracy, and I am glad that this allowed opposition parties to end the boycott of Parliament and participate in the election. However, it will now be important not to stop here. Such reforms still require adequate implementation, and more reforms are needed in the future to address other pending and very important recommendations. But let me be clear, this is the spirit, talking and finding common solutions for the good of the people. If done transparently, I am sure this will also contribute to a less polarized political discourse, which in turn would help to rebuild trust in the political system. That is today very low here in Serbia. As a politician myself, I know the crucial importance of the trust relation between citizen and politics for the health of democratic system. In conclusion, I wish the very best to Serbia and the Serbian people, and I hope that together we will be able to work on this recommendation, continuing to improve each other democratic system. Thank you. Hvala puno.
And thank you very much, Ms. Haraldsdottir. Now, please, Douglas Wake.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm really pleased to be back here in Serbia, a country where I've previously enjoyed the opportunity to live and work. And I'm honored on this occasion to represent the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights and its long-term election observation mission, which has been deployed at the invitation of the Serbian authorities. We've been here for 6 weeks now, since the 21st of February, with a team of over 20 experts and analysts, as well as 26 long-term observers deployed throughout Serbia. In line with our mandate, we've been following not only election day developments, but the entire process, before, during, and after Election Day, with the aim of providing recommendations for improvements in this process, in line with OSCE commitments and other international standards, which of course Serbia, along with all of our countries, have undertaken. As mentioned by others already, this week we've been joined by a large number of short-term observers and parliamentary partners for the observation of yesterday's voting, counting, and the ongoing tabulation process, results of which are now reflected in the preliminary statement, which will soon be distributed. With 265 ODIHR observers and over 100 from our 3 parliamentary partners, hailing from 47 different participating states, this is the largest international election observation mission that's been deployed since the pandemic. Also, while it's the 16th ODIHR election activity in Serbia since the 1990s, it's the first time we've had full mission, including long and short-term observers, in many years. So during these 6 weeks, we've had the opportunity to engage extensively with Serbian counterparts across the political spectrum and in key institutions. Among other things, we've been interested in the way that Serbia has implemented recommendations made by previous ODIHR missions about the ways that Serbia, for example, could improve its election process to best enable citizens to express their will. In that regard, as highlighted in our report today, a number of welcome changes to electoral legislation and practice were recently introduced. Some of these address recommendations offered by previous election observation missions, relating mainly to such important but largely technical matters as making election administration bodies more inclusive and enhancing their transparency, enhancing the transparency and disclosure of political party and campaign finance, and ensuring that the right of civil society organizations to observe Serbian elections, something which has a long and distinguished history here, now is also finally anchored in the law. But as further highlighted by our observations, as reflected also in our report, much more fundamental reforms are needed in areas addressed by the OSCE ODIHR long-term and long-standing recommendations. We hope that our cooperation with Serbian counterparts will continue in a positive spirit and that it will allow us to support Serbia in making progress in such important areas as the following, many of which have already been highlighted by my parliamentary partners in their remarks. It's really important that Serbia take steps to make media access much more equitable, not only during, but also between elections. It's critical to have greater accountability for any campaign offenses, both through the election administration and criminal law, if appropriate. It's critical to facilitate steps to improve the accuracy of the voter register and to make campaign finance regulation much more meaningful and effective, including through consideration of an overall cap on campaign spending and tighter reporting requirements. Such reforms and their effective implementation are indispensable to ensuring that all contestants in Serbian elections can compete on an equal basis, that civil society and media can contribute effectively to democratic debate, and that all voters have the opportunity to make fully informed choices. Colleagues to my right have started their remarks with thanks, including to our mission, which I appreciate. In turn, I'd like to express my thanks to all of our parliamentary partners, and especially to the Serbian authorities, the Republican Election Commission, and the Ministry for Foreign Affairs for their invitation and for their extensive cooperation with our mission. I'd also like to pay tribute, as we close this part of the session, to the highly professional ODIHR Election Observation Mission staff, our core team, our long-term observers, our short-term observers, as well as our national assistants, for long hours, for hard work during a period where we still face challenges relating to the pandemic, and everyone's done that all very responsibly and professionally. And finally, I'd just like to note that the ODIHR Election Observation Mission is not leaving today or tomorrow. We will be here for about another 10 days in order to ensure that we can follow the rest of the electoral process, including any complaints and appeals. And in closing, I'd like to say how much we look forward to continuing engagement with Serbia as a partner and with the Serbian people as partners in seeking to better implement OSCE commitments for democratic elections. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Mr. Wake. Just before we move on to media questions, Mr. Hajianis has asked me to make for him his apologies due to unavoidable travel complications. He must leave us early this afternoon, but so.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you, dear colleagues. Thank you, all of you, that you were today here by us. And I forgot all the questions and the answer to my colleagues here. Thank you.
All right, so we have time, as I mentioned now, for questions from the media. What I'll ask you to do, if you do have a question, please, is to raise your hand, and we'll have a microphone brought to you. Before you ask your question, could you please just give your name and the media outlet that you represent?
Poštovanje, jesi čuo? Stefan Miljuš, televizija N1. Kako komentarišete to što zvanične rezultate izbora dobijamo od predsjednika Srpske napredne stranke i najsnažnije političke partije u Srbiji, a ne od zvanične institucije, odnosno Republičke izborne komisije? I još jedno pitanje što se tiče nepravilnosti. Posmatračka misija CRTA je navela da je primetno bilo na nekoliko izbornih mesta takozvani slučajevi bugarskog voza u Kuli i Surčinu, kupovina glasova u Majdanpeku i Žitorađi i da su vođeni i paralelni birački spiskovi. Da li vi imate neke slične informacije? Hvala.
A very straight and quick answer. Of course, in the history and after many elections, the candidates, they pronounce that they believe that they won. But I strongly believe that it should be appropriate body first to pronounce the official figures. And by the way, I used to observe in many countries, and usually we have those exit polls very, very soon. And even in on televisions, you have estimations which change over the night, next days. But my answer to your question is that, yes, indeed, I would prefer the appropriate body to answer this. And for your second question, yes, we, some of our colleagues witnessed what you describe as vote buying, but it was very, not many cases. So if we are speaking about percentage, they are very, very, very low figures. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. On the question of the announcement of the results, yes, I regretted very much that the Central Electoral Committee did not only not announce any further or preliminary final results, they were actually closed down. And I have to guess what the reason is for that, but apparently there has been some kind of decision that the committee itself could not do its job. And instead, the president, but also candidate at multiple elections, announced the result himself. What the value is of that result remains to be seen until after we will receive any official announcement of the Central Electoral Committee. So that is regrettable. And which concerns to vote buying, the problem is that it's rather difficult to actually observe it and identify the practice. And that makes it also difficult to resolve it, to actually act upon it. So it will require actions from the newly elected Serbian parliament, the Serbian government, to restore the faith in the electoral process by avoiding these kind of practices and by also instructing the electorate that this is not the way to deal with your vote, the way to use your vote, your electoral rights to choose your representatives.
Thank you. I don't think I have to add anything to it. It is pretty thorough, and we also have it in our report. When President Vučić claims victory, it was not unofficial data. It was his pronouncement of what had happened, so we still wait for the official data. Thank you.
Any further questions? All right, I guess we can take that as a sign that we've explained this all pretty well and presented it. So all that's left to do is to thank you both from myself and from the members of the panel today for joining us. and to wish you a wonderful rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.